The ground beneath your feet holds a secret history we are only beginning to read. This video explores 35 anomalous archaeological strata, layers of earth containing evidence that shatters the standard human timeline. By the end, you will see the entire story of how we settled the planet in a radically new light. How did human tools end up in American soil 200,000 years before we supposedly arrived? What do ancient footprints in New Mexico, preserved for over 20,000 years, tell us about a forgotten chapter of life here? These are not mere curiosities, but profound challenges to every textbook narrative. What does it mean for our origin story when the Earth itself seems to contradict it? This conventional story is a masterpiece of scientific deduction. For decades, researchers have meticulously assembled it like a vast, interlocking puzzle. The central pieces disciplines. Genetics traces the branching family tree of our species through mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes, suggesting a great migration from Africa within the last 100,000 years. Archaeology provides the physical evidence, the stone tools and ancient hearths found in layers of earth across continents. And geology offers the clock, primarily through radiocarbon dating, which measures the decay of a specific form of carbon in organic materials like bone or charcoal to determine their age. Together, they built a coherent and elegant narrative, a timeline where humanity's footsteps across the globe follow a clear and sequential path. The deepest archaeological layers in the Americas, for instance, consistently yielded artifacts dated to around 13 to 15,000 years old, aligning perfectly with the theory that humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge at the end of the last ice age. This timeline became the backbone of textbooks, the framework for museum exhibits, the accepted story of us. But what happens when you discover a bone, or a tool, or a footprint, buried in a layer of earth that the geological clock says is far, far older? This is not a matter of a few hundred years, a minor calibration error. These are discrepancies of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. They are like finding a modern coin sealed beneath the foundation stones of a Roman villa. The artifact is undeniable and its location is clear, yet its presence in that specific stratum defies every logical sequence in the historical record. These are the anomalous strata, the pages in Earth's diary that seem to tell a different, much older story. They force us to ask a difficult but thrilling question. Was our puzzle missing pieces from the very beginning, or have we been assembling it with the wrong picture in mind? An anomalous artifact is a contradiction made solid. It is an object that seems to speak from two different times at once. Think of it not as just a very old coin, but a coin bearing the face of a 20th century president, discovered sealed within the mortar of a medieval castle wall. The object itself is real, its location is verified, yet its presence in that specific layer of history makes no logical sense. In archaeology, this phenomenon is often described as an out-of-place artifact. The place in question is not a geographic one, but a temporal one, defined by the geological stratum in which it was found. A stratum is a distinct layer of sedimentary rock or soil, laid down over a specific period, acting as a time capsule. When archaeologists carefully excavate, they record exactly which stratum each artifact comes from, for that layer's age, determined by geological and chemical dating methods, becomes the artifact's assumed age. An anomaly occurs when the object's nature violently disagrees with that age. This could be a finely crafted iron nail embedded in coal deposits formed millions of years before ironworking existed. Or it could be a human femur discovered alongside the fossils of a mammoth in a geological bed that dates to a time when, according to all mainstream models, no humans should have been on that continent. These are not typically cases of forgery or careless digging. They are meticulously documented puzzles from respected sites, often rediscovered during later re-examination of old excavation records or museum collections. The weight of such a find creates a profound scientific tension. If the dating of the stratum is correct, then perhaps our entire timeline for human technological development is backwards. If the artifact is truly what it appears to be, then maybe our clocks for deep history are fundamentally miscalibrated. Or, most unsettling of all, perhaps the story of human settlement is far longer, more complex, and filled with more forgotten chapters than we have ever dared to believe. Understanding this definition is crucial because it transforms a curious old object into a key that might unlock a door we never knew was there. The first challenge to that textbook timeline lies in the sun-baked silence of California's Mojave Desert. Here, at a place known as the Calico Early Man Site, a simple hill of ancient gravel holds a claim that would rewrite history. In the 1960s, archaeologists began excavating what appeared to be very crude stone tools, simple choppers and scrapers, from deep within an ancient alluvial fan, a geological formation built up by water flowing from nearby mountains. The shock came not from the tools themselves, but from the age of the sediments that encased them. Based on geological analysis and the dating of associated volcanic ash, that layer of earth was estimated to be over 200,000 years old. This number is staggering. It places potential human activity in the Americas at a time when, according to the dominant model, our species was only just beginning its journey out of Africa. The implications are profound. If these stones were shaped by human hands, then the entire story of the peopling of the New World, the epic migration across the Bering Land Bridge at the end of the last ice age, becomes just the final chapter in a much longer, forgotten saga. The site drew the attention of the legendary paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey, who became a vocal proponent of its authenticity. He saw in the concentrated scatter of fractured stones, found along what would have been the shoreline of a vast Pleistocene lake, the unmistakable signature of a tool-making workshop. Proponents argue that the stones are not random geological debris. They are found in a specific context away from the natural parent rock and show patterns of repeated, purposeful flaking that nature alone would struggle to replicate. They paint a picture of a small group, perhaps an early, isolated branch of humanity, living and working by a long-vanished lake under a vastly different climate. Yet from the moment of its discovery, Calico has been a lightning rod for controversy. The central criticism is as simple as it is devastating. Skeptics argue these are not tools at all, but the products of natural geological processes. Rocks tumbling in ancient streams, falling from cliffs, or being crushed under shifting sediments can fracture in ways that eerily mimic crude human workmanship. The debate hinges on a fundamental question of interpretation. How do we distinguish the first, clumsy signature of human intention from the random artistry of natural forces? For many mainstream archaeologists, the evidence at Calico never crossed that definitive threshold. The artifacts are too ambiguous, the case for human manufacture too circumstantial. The site was relegated to the fringes, a tantalizing but unproven anomaly. But dismissing Calico entirely may be too easy. Its true significance lies not in providing a definitive answer, but in exposing the very framework of the debate. It forces us to confront the immense difficulty of recognizing the earliest, most primitive technology. It highlights the tension between two powerful forms of evidence: the geological context, which screams one age, and the artifact itself, which whispers an unbelievable story. Calico stands as a monument to a critical idea, that the first page of human history in the Americas might be written in a language of stone we are still learning to read. And if this controversial site in the desert is just the opening argument, what other evidence, buried in even stranger places, is waiting to be heard? But if the Calico tools were crude whispers of an impossible past, the artifacts from Hueyatlaco in central Mexico are a shout. The Valsequillo region is a landscape steeped in deep time, its soil holding the bones of mammoths, giant sloths, and other Pleistocene giants. In the 1960s, archaeologists working at a site called Hueyatlaco made a discovery that went far beyond ancient animal remains. They unearthed exquisitely crafted stone tools, including finely worked projectile points and blades that displayed a level of skill and sophistication far beyond the simple choppers found elsewhere. The true shock, however, was not the tools themselves, but the geological prison that held them. These artifacts were sealed within a distinct layer of volcanic ash. Volcanic ash is a gift to geologists. It acts like a global timestamp, a moment of geological violence frozen in the sedimentary record. Researchers applied multiple independent dating methods to this ash layer and the strata above it, techniques like uranium-series and fission track dating that measure the decay of specific radioactive elements within minerals. The results from these rigorous tests converged on a single, staggering number, approximately 250,000 years. Let that number settle. It is more than 200,000 years older than the accepted arrival date for humans in the Americas. This was not a claim of primitive, barely human presence. It was evidence of skilled artisans crafting advanced tools on a continent that, according to every textbook, should have been utterly devoid of any human life. The implications are dizzying. It suggests a population not just surviving but thriving with a well-developed technological tradition at a time when Europe was still the domain of Neanderthals. The scientific backlash was immediate and ferocious. The date was so radically outside the paradigm that many archaeologists found it easier to reject the dating methods or suggest the tools must have somehow slipped down from a much younger layer than to accept the conclusion. The controversy became less about the evidence itself and more about the limits of scientific belief. How do you process data that, if true, demands you tear down the entire framework of your life's work? The Hueyatlaco ash layer stands as a monument to this tension. It represents the ultimate anomalous stratum, where impeccable geology and stunning artifacts collide to tell a story we are not yet ready to hear. It forces a haunting question: is it more scientific to dismiss impossible evidence, or to let that evidence redefine what is possible? While the claims of Calico and Hueyatlaco push the timeline to its breaking point, a different kind of evidence has been quietly building a more gradual, yet equally revolutionary case. Along the banks of the Savannah River in South Carolina, the Topper site presents not a shocking shout, but a persistent, layered whisper. Here, archaeologists have peeled back the earth to reveal a story written in stone, one stratum at a time. The uppermost layers contain the classic, fluted spear points of the Clovis culture, dated to around 13,000 years ago, the very hallmark of the traditional first Americans. But the true mystery lies beneath them. Excavators continued digging, moving down through the soil, through time itself, until they reached a deeper, older stratum. From this layer, they recovered simple tools made from local chert, a flint-like stone. These artifacts are not the elegant, symmetrical points of the Clovis hunters above. They are cores, flakes, and crude choppers. Yet to a trained eye, they bear the unmistakable signature of human workmanship, deliberate flaking patterns and edges worn smooth from use. The question, of course, is when. To date this pre-Clovis layer, scientists turn to a clever geological clock called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL. This technique does not date the stone tool itself, but the last time the surrounding sand grains were exposed to sunlight before being buried. It measures trapped energy within the crystals, a resetting that happens upon burial. The OSL dates from the sediments holding these simple tools returned a staggering result, suggesting human activity at Topper could stretch back 50,000 years or more. This finding transforms the site from a curious dig into a cornerstone of a new paradigm. Topper is not an isolated freak. It is part of a growing constellation of sites across the Americas, from Pennsylvania to Brazil, that together tell a coherent, older story. They challenge the Clovis first model not with a single contradictory fact, but with a consistent pattern of evidence for a pre-Clovis population. This suggests a far more complex narrative of human settlement, perhaps involving multiple, separate waves of migration across millennia, or a single, much earlier arrival followed by long periods of isolation and adaptation. The tools at Topper are humble, but their implication is monumental. They hint at a lost epoch of human experience in the Americas, a deep, silent prologue to the story we thought we knew. But a mastodon's bones can tell a story that stone tools cannot. In the late 1990s, a routine highway expansion in San Diego, California, cut deep into a hillside, exposing something extraordinary. Paleontologists from the San Diego Natural History Museum were called in to salvage fossils, and what they uncovered would ignite one of the most intense debates in modern archaeology. It was the partial skeleton of a young mastodon, a prehistoric relative of the elephant, but it was not lying in a peaceful, natural arrangement. The bones were scattered, and several of the large limb bones exhibited peculiar spiral fractures, the kind often seen when fresh bone is struck with great force. Lying amidst the bones were several heavy, rounded cobblestones of a different rock type than the surrounding sediment, stones that appeared out of place. The site was named for Richard Cerruti, the field paleontologist who first recognized its significance. The immediate question was obvious: what or who had broken these massive bones over 100,000 years ago? The team employed a suite of rigorous dating methods on the bone material itself and the surrounding mineral crusts, techniques like uranium-thorium dating that measure radioactive decay chains over immense timescales. The results from multiple independent tests converged on a single, almost unbelievable date, approximately 130,000 years before the present. This number alone was a seismic shock, more than 100,000 years older than the earliest widely accepted evidence for humans in the Americas. But the researchers went further. They conducted meticulous forensic analysis, arguing that the spiral fractures could not have been caused by the weight of overlying sediment or the gnawing of predators. The pattern, they concluded, was consistent with the bones being placed on stone anvils and struck repeatedly with hammerstones while they were still fresh and green. The out-of-place cobbles, they suggested, were the very tools used for this purpose, perhaps to extract marrow or access tendons. The implications of the Cerruti mastodon site are staggering. It proposes not just the presence of humans, but of humans engaged in sophisticated, cooperative behavior working together to process a massive animal for resources, on a continent they supposedly had not yet discovered. The site forces a direct and uncomfortable confrontation between two scientific disciplines. On one side is taphonomy, the study of everything that happens to an organism from its death to its discovery as a fossil. Taphonomists, the site's skeptics, ask if purely natural processes could create this scene. Could the bones have been fractured by the immense pressure of shifting rocks in an ancient stream bed? Could those cobblestones have been tumbled into position by the same forces, creating a false pattern of association? It is a debate about reading the signatures left in stone and bone, a search for the faintest trace of intelligent agency in a world ruled by random, violent geology. The Cerruti mastodon does not offer easy answers. It presents a tableau frozen in time that whispers of a possibility so radical it challenges the foundations of the story. It asks us to look at a pile of broken bones and scattered stones and decide, do we see the chaotic work of nature or the deliberate, ancient hand of someone who was not supposed to be there? The debate over broken bones in California is mirrored by a different kind of argument, one found in the painted rock shelters of northeastern Brazil. The Serra do Capivara National Park is a landscape of towering sandstone cliffs, etched by time into a labyrinth of canyons and sheltered alcoves. Within these natural galleries, known as the Pedra Furada sites, archaeologists have uncovered a layered chronicle that pushes human presence in the Americas to a profound depth. The walls themselves are a canvas, adorned with thousands of vivid paintings depicting hunters, rituals, and long-extinct animals, a breathtaking artistic legacy. But the true evidence lies not just on the walls but in the floor beneath them. Excavations have revealed a deep sequence of occupation, layer upon layer of ancient living. Researchers found charcoal from ancient hearths, piles of stones that formed simple structures, and thousands of stone tools. To date these layers, scientists used two powerful methods: radiocarbon dating on the charcoal and thermoluminescence dating on the burned stones from the hearths. The results were consistent and startling, suggesting human activity in these shelters stretching back an astonishing 50,000 years. This would place people in South America tens of thousands of years before the ice-free corridor into North America was even open, pointing to the possibility of a different migration route, perhaps along coastlines now submerged beneath the ocean. Yet, as with Calico, the core of the controversy lies in the very oldest evidence. In the deepest, most ancient strata, the tools are not elegant spear points, but simple quartzite flakes. To the excavators, these flakes show clear patterns of deliberate striking, a specific way the stone was hit to detach a sharp cutting edge. They see the handiwork of the first pioneers to reach this lush region. Skeptics, however, look at the same objects and see something else entirely: geofacts. Quartzite is a brittle stone, and in a dynamic environment where rocks fall from cliffs and tumble down slopes, natural forces can produce fractures that are remarkably similar to crude human workmanship. The entire Pedra Furada debate hinges on this microscopic frontier, the line between the first faint signature of human intention and the random artistry of geology. It is a testament to the immense difficulty of recognizing our own earliest technological footsteps. Whether one accepts the 50,000-year date or not, Pedra Furada's significance is undeniable. It demonstrates that the puzzle of anomalous strata is not a North American curiosity, but a hemispheric phenomenon. From the deserts of California to the painted cliffs of Brazil, the Earth tells a story of deep, complicated time, suggesting that the human journey across this planet was not a single sprint, but a long, winding odyssey filled with chapters we have only just begun to read. Far to the north, where the ground remains locked in a deep freeze for millennia, another piece of the puzzle was preserved in perfect cold storage. The Bluefish Caves are three small, unassuming cavities carved into a limestone ridge in Canada's Yukon Territory, a landscape that feels like the very edge of the habitable world. For thousands of years, the permafrost here has acted as a natural deep freezer, sealing away a microscopic record of ancient life. What archaeologists found within these caves was not a grand campsite or a cache of elegant spear points, but something more subtle and perhaps more telling: a scatter of tiny stone blades no larger than a fingernail, known as microblades, lying amidst the fragmented bones of Ice Age horses, mammoths, and caribou. The bones themselves told a clear story. They bore the fine cut marks and impact fractures characteristic of systematic butchery. This was not a scene of natural death, but of human activity. The true revelation came when scientists applied radiocarbon dating to these very bones, to the collagen still preserved within them by the permafrost. The dates returned were consistently ancient, pointing to human presence at the site as early as 24,000 years ago. This single number forces a dramatic reimagining of the entire migration narrative. 24,000 years ago places humans in the gateway to the Americas not during a time of easy passage, but at the absolute peak of the last ice age, a period known as the last glacial maximum. At this time, colossal ice sheets, thousands of feet thick, smothered much of Canada, and the legendary ice-free corridor, the inland route through which the first Americans were thought to have traveled, was utterly sealed shut by walls of glacial ice. So what does this evidence mean? It suggests a scenario far more complex than a simple sprint from Asia into the New World. The Bluefish Caves point to the existence of a Beringian refugium, a vast, now submerged plain that once connected Siberia to Alaska. This was not a bridge to be crossed quickly, but a habitable landmass in its own right, a cold, grassy steppe teeming with game. The people at Bluefish Caves were likely not travelers in motion, but survivors in place. They and their ancestors may have been isolated in this northern world for thousands of years, a population paused at the threshold of the continents, waiting out the icy siege. This stratum does not just push the date of arrival back, it stretches the entire process of settlement into a long, patient saga. It replaces the image of a rapid rush into empty lands with one of a prolonged, resilient sojourn in a harsh but viable homeland. The microblades and butchered bones from the Yukon permafrost tell us that the peopling of the Americas was not a single event, but a multi-millennial epic, with its own forgotten chapters of adaptation and survival written in the deep cold of the North. Yet the evidence for a deeper human past was not confined to the remote edges of the continent. In the rolling woodlands of western Pennsylvania, a place called the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter offered a different kind of proof, one that was impossible for the archaeological establishment to ignore. This was not a windswept cave or a sun-baked desert site, but a deeply stratified overhang, a natural shelter used by generations of people. Its significance lies in its impeccable clarity. Excavators working with painstaking care peeled back the soil to reveal a perfect chronological sequence, a layer cake of human history. Near the top, they found the classic fluted spear points of the Clovis culture, exactly where the textbook timeline said they should be. But the team kept digging, moving down through time, through layers of ancient hearths filled with charcoal, through scattered stone tools and the discarded shells of meals eaten millennia ago. The deepest occupational levels, sealed beneath sterile layers of sediment, held simple tools and the remnants of campfires. When samples of that ancient charcoal were subjected to rigorous radiocarbon dating, the results sent a shockwave through the discipline. The dates suggested human activity at Meadowcroft began somewhere between 16,000 and 19,000 years before the present. This was not a fringe claim from a controversial figure. It was the result of one of the most meticulous excavations in North American archaeology, employing multiple dating methods and strict controls to rule out contamination. Meadowcroft presented the archaeological community with a profound dilemma. Here was a site with flawless methodology, yielding dates that were undeniably pre-Clovis, yet still within a range that felt marginally more conceivable than the staggering claims of 200,000 years. It forced a slow, grudging, but undeniable shift. One could no longer dismiss all early dates as sloppy science or geological confusion. Meadowcroft acted as a crucial pivot point, demonstrating that anomalous strata could be found not just at the radical fringes, but at the very heart of mainstream archaeological practice. It proved that the timeline was not a fixed wall, but a fence that could be moved, one meticulously dated posthole at a time. If a site this well documented demanded an older story, then the entire narrative had to stretch to accommodate it. The shelter's layers whispered a simple, undeniable truth that people had been sitting by these fires, looking out from this rocky overhang, for thousands of years longer than anyone had officially believed. The story of Meadowcroft was not an isolated whisper from a single shelter. Just a few hundred miles to the south, the sandy ridges along Virginia's Nottoway River held a parallel tale, one that added a crucial new dimension to the mystery. This is the Cactus Hill site. Like Meadowcroft, its excavation revealed a beautifully clear geological story. The uppermost stratum contained the familiar, elegant fluted points of the Clovis culture, the signature of hunters who lived there roughly 13,000 years ago. But directly beneath that layer, separated by a band of sterile sand that acted like a page break in history, excavators found something entirely different. This lower stratum held a distinct toolkit featuring carefully crafted blades and unique projectile points with stems, a design completely unlike the fluted Clovis points above. The separation was pristine, arguing powerfully against any mixing of materials from different time periods. When scientists dated charcoal and sediment from this deeper occupation level, the results pointed to a much older chapter, with dates clustering around 18,000 to 20,000 years ago. Cactus Hill's significance goes far beyond just adding another early date to the list. It introduces the compelling idea of cultural succession. The people who made the stemmed points below were not merely earlier versions of the Clovis people above. They appear to have been a different group altogether, with their own technological traditions and ways of shaping stone. This transforms the narrative from a simple question of when into a far richer puzzle of who. It suggests the possibility of multiple, separate pulses of migration into the Americas, perhaps arriving by different routes at different times, each bringing their own unique cultural signature. The sterile sand between the layers at Cactus Hill is a silent millennium, a gap in the record that speaks volumes. It hints at a scenario where one group flourished and then vanished, leaving the land empty for a time before a new wave, with new ideas, eventually arrived to write the next chapter on top of the old. This site moves us from a timeline into a tapestry, woven with threads of different cultures across a vast and ancient landscape. Deep in the arid canyons of southern New Mexico, just north of the modern border, a small cave carved into a limestone cliff holds evidence so intimate it feels like a personal message from the distant past. This is Pendijo Cave. Unlike sites defined by grand stone tools or massive animal bones, the whispers here are human in the most literal sense. Excavations within its sheltered interior revealed a layered sequence of ancient living, and within the deepest, oldest strata, researchers made a series of startling claims. They recovered what appeared to be preserved human hair, fragments of simple stone tools, and most controversially, the impression of a human fingerprint, pressed into a hardened piece of ancient clay that may have been part of a hearth. These were not just objects left behind, but traces of the body itself, a fleeting moment of contact frozen in time. To date these fragile clues, scientists applied both radiocarbon dating to organic materials and optically stimulated luminescence to the surrounding sediments. The results spanned a vast and challenging time frame, suggesting human activity in the cave could range from 25,000 to an astonishing 55,000 years ago. The implications of such dates are once again revolutionary, placing people in the American Southwest at a time when ice sheets still dominated the continent. Yet Pendijo Cave has never been embraced by the mainstream. The evidence is fragmentary, literally and figuratively. A single hair can be contaminated. A fingerprint impression in clay can be mimicked by natural erosion or even the touch of a modern excavator. Skeptics argue the finds are inconclusive, that they lack the undeniable, repeated signature of a clear occupation site. For many, it is easier to dismiss these whispers as noise than to accept them as a signal from a forgotten epoch. But the persistent question remains, why does this pattern keep appearing? Pendijo Cave does not stand alone. It is part of a chorus of sites across the Americas whose combined voices, however faint and debated, all sing the same unsettling song of profound antiquity. It represents a critical category in this mystery, the site where the evidence is not a smoking gun, but a collection of tantalizing, ambiguous clues that refuse to go away. They point not to a definitive conclusion, but to a haunting possibility that the full story of human presence here is written in traces too delicate for our current methods to read with certainty, yet too persistent for us to ignore. The painted shelters of Brazil are not the only places whispering of deep time in South America. Far from the protective cliffs, out on the open plains of Piauí State, lies a site that tells a different, equally compelling part of the story. Toca da Terra-Peia is an open-air site, a place where ancient people lived and worked not under a rocky roof, but under the vast, open sky. Here, archaeologists have uncovered not a handful of ambiguous stones, but hundreds of distinct stone tools, all sealed within a single, datable layer of earth. The tools themselves are crafted from the local stone, quartz and quartzite, materials that fracture in a particular, glassy way. To the trained eye, they are unmistakable, each piece showing the clear, concentric ripples of a deliberate strike, with edges that have been carefully retouched and resharpened for specific tasks. This was not a temporary stop, but a place of sustained activity, a workshop and living area where a community shaped their world. To determine when this happened, researchers turned again to the geological clock of optically stimulated luminescence, dating the very sediments that had buried and preserved the tools for millennia. The results pointed to a consistent and profound age, approximately 22,000 years. This number carries a weight that extends far beyond the site itself. An open-air occupation of this scale at this date changes the entire geography of the early human story in the Americas. It demonstrates that people were not just fleeting visitors hiding in caves, but were established on the landscape, comfortable and adapted to the environment. To be crafting tools on the plains of eastern Brazil 22,000 years ago means their ancestors must have begun the journey from Beringia, the ancient land bridge, thousands of years before that. It compresses the timeline for the entire hemispheric migration into a breathtakingly short and implausible sprint if we cling to the old models. Instead, Toca da Terra-Peia, with its scatter of quartz tools under the open sky, argues for a much earlier, more gradual, and continent-wide process of exploration and settlement, a slow filling in of a world that was already home. The scattered tools of Brazil and the icy caves of the Yukon paint a picture of a continent slowly being explored, but the story needed a single, undeniable piece of evidence to bring it all into focus. That evidence came not from stone but from peat preserved in a quiet riverbank in southern Chile. The Monte Verde site is more than an archaeological dig. It is a time capsule of astonishing intimacy. Here, a slow-flowing creek and waterlogged conditions created a natural seal, a layer of peat that prevented decay and froze a moment of human life in stunning detail. This was not just a place where people passed through, it was a small, organized settlement. Excavators uncovered the foundations of wooden huts, structures made from logs and planks held together with fiber cordage. They found wooden tools, digging sticks, and even the remains of ancient meals, including wild potatoes and the bones of mastodon. Perhaps most remarkably, they recovered a chunk of chewed leaves from a medicinal plant, a fleeting, personal act preserved for 18,000 years. This level of preservation is almost unheard of in archaeology, where typically only stone and bone survive. At Monte Verde, the entire fabric of daily life was miraculously saved. The dating of this site was equally robust. Multiple samples of wood, charcoal, and other organic materials from throughout the settlement were subjected to rigorous radiocarbon dating. The results were consistent and overwhelming, placing the occupation of Monte Verde firmly between 14,500 and 18,500 years ago. This date alone is revolutionary. It places a well-established community thousands of miles south of the Bering Land Bridge, living in harmony with their environment, at a time when, according to the Clovis first model, the first pioneers should have just been entering North America. The distance is staggering. It implies a migration that must have begun millennia earlier to allow time for people to traverse two continents and establish a settled life in southern Chile. Monte Verde did what no controversial desert site or debated cave could do. It presented evidence so complete, so beautifully preserved, and so impeccably dated that the archaeological community could not look away. It was the anomaly that broke the paradigm. In the late 1990s, after years of scrutiny and debate, a delegation of prominent, skeptical archaeologists visited the site. They examined the evidence firsthand, the wooden structures still in place, the tools, the dated materials. They left convinced. This site single-handedly shattered the Clovis first consensus, forcing textbooks to be rewritten and the human timeline in the Americas to be dramatically expanded. Monte Verde stands as a powerful testament to a simple truth. Sometimes the Earth holds onto a story so completely, so perfectly, that it has the power to change everything we thought we knew. The crystal-clear waters of Florida's Osceola River hide a library of a lost world. Beneath the slow current and a thick blanket of peat lies the Page Ladson site, a submerged sinkhole that was once a vital freshwater spring on a dry Pleistocene landscape. Here, divers working in near-zero visibility have recovered something extraordinary from the murky depths. Stone tools resting peacefully alongside the massive bones and tusks of mastodons. But these were not simply two separate things that ended up in the same place. The bones themselves tell a story of encounter, bearing the fine, straight, V-shaped grooves that are the unmistakable signature of stone tools slicing through fresh hide and meat. This is direct evidence of butchery, a moment frozen in time where humans interacted with one of the giants of the Ice Age. The dating of the site is built from the very environment that sealed it. Researchers analyzed the surrounding sediments and ancient plant remains, like seeds and twigs, that had settled into the sinkhole alongside the cultural material. Radiocarbon dates from these botanical clues converge on a timeline of human activity, here approximately 14,500 years ago. This date is crucial. It sits right at the cusp of, and even slightly before, the traditional dawn of the Clovis period. Page Ladson does more than just add another early date to the map. It paints a vivid portrait of capability. These early people were not clinging to coasts or hiding in shelters. They were venturing inland, navigating a mosaic of rivers, springs, and forests. They possessed the knowledge and coordination to confront and process animals that stood over 10 feet tall, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of their environment and its resources. The site's underwater context is what makes this evidence so powerful and irrefutable. The peat and silt that filled the sinkhole created an oxygen-poor environment, perfectly preserving organic materials that would have vanished on dry land. This pristine context rules out any possibility that the tools and bones were mixed together by later flooding or geological disturbance. What divers recovered was a sealed snapshot, a single frame from a much longer film of life in ancient Florida. Page Ladson provides a tangible, tactile connection to a time when humans were already established, skilled, and shaping their destiny in ecosystems we can barely recognize today. It whispers that the story of the first Americans is not one of hesitant newcomers, but of confident pioneers who knew the land intimately, long before the arrival of the culture we once called the first. The meticulous clarity of Monte Verde and the submerged snapshots of Page Ladson built an undeniable case for a deeper past. Yet the story was still missing a crucial piece, a site that could connect the dots between the shadowy pre-Clovis pioneers and the famous culture that supposedly came first. That connection lies in the rolling hills of central Texas, at a place called the Gault site. For decades, Gault was celebrated as one of the richest Clovis sites ever discovered, a treasure trove of the iconic fluted spear points, finely crafted blades, and engraved stones that define this sophisticated hunting culture. It seemed to be a textbook example of the first Americans in their prime, But then archaeologists kept digging. Beneath the prolific Clovis layer, they encountered something that transformed the site's entire meaning. They found a distinct, older stratum, sealed and separate, containing stone tools of a completely different character. These were not the refined, symmetrical points of the Clovis hunters above. They were simpler, more varied artifacts, including unfluted points and blades made using a different technical approach. Radiocarbon dating of materials from this deeper layer pointed to an age of at least 16,000 years, placing it firmly in the pre-Clovis era. The Gault site does more than just add another early date to the map. It delivers a profound insight into the nature of human innovation. Here, in one location, we see not a single monolithic culture marching in a straight line of progress, but a layered tapestry of technological thought. The people who left those older tools beneath the Clovis layer were not primitive ancestors of the Clovis people. They appear to have been practitioners of a separate, parallel tradition. This suggests that the earliest populations in the Americas were not a uniform wave carrying one toolkit, but likely multiple groups arriving at different times, or perhaps one group fragmenting and innovating in isolation, each developing their own solutions for survival. Gault complicates the timeline in the most fascinating way possible. It argues that the story of early settlement is not a simple linear progression from primitive to advanced, but a mosaic. Different groups with different knowledge and different ways of shaping the world around them were already experimenting and adapting across the continent long before the Clovis culture ever emerged. The site asks us to reconsider what we mean by first. Were the Clovis people the first, or were they simply the first to achieve a certain widespread, recognizable style, a brilliant technology that spread like wildfire across a landscape already inhabited by other, older stories? The strata at Gault hold the answer, a silent testament to a past far more diverse and creatively restless than we ever imagined. While stone tools and butchered bones reveal what people made and ate, a different kind of evidence can tell us who they were on the most intimate biological level. Hidden within the dry, dusty silence of Oregon's Paisley Caves, researchers made a discovery that was both profoundly unglamorous and scientifically revolutionary. They found human coprolites, the ancient, mineralized remains of human waste. This humble material became a time capsule of unparalleled value, for preserved within it was human DNA. Radiocarbon dating of these coprolites yielded a date of approximately 14,300 years, making them, at the time of their analysis, the oldest directly dated human genetic material ever recovered in the Americas. This was not indirect evidence from a tool or a hearth. This was a biological signature, a direct link to an individual who lived and breathed at the dawn of human history on this continent. The genetic story told by this DNA added a stunning new layer to the mystery. It showed clear ancestral links to populations in Siberia and East Asia, confirming the broad origins of the first peoples. But the context of this genetic clue made it even more significant. In the same general time period within the caves, archaeologists also recovered a distinct style of stone tool known as western-stemmed points. These points are technologically different from the classic fluted points of the Clovis culture. They are shaped differently, thinned differently, and represent a separate tradition of craftsmanship. The implications are profound. Here, at roughly the same time that Clovis hunters were flourishing elsewhere, a different group of people, genetically distinct and following their own technological path, were also living in Western North America. They were hunting, gathering, and surviving using their own toolkit, a parallel branch on the early human family tree. This evidence from Paisley Caves moves the narrative beyond a simple question of when people arrived and into the complex realm of who they were and how they lived. It suggests that the early settlement of the continents was not a monolithic event with a single culture spreading uniformly. Instead, It paints a picture of multiple, possibly separate migrations or early population splits, each group carrying its own knowledge and traditions, adapting to different environments and resources. The caves tell us that 14,000 years ago, the story of humanity in the New World was already a story of diversity, with multiple threads being woven into the tapestry of life simultaneously. It asks us to listen not for a single voice from the past, but for a chorus, each singing a slightly different song of survival. The evidence for a pre-Clovis world was no longer confined to isolated caves or controversial outcrops. It began appearing in the very heartlands of the Clovis culture itself, in places like the rolling terrain just outside Austin, Texas, here at the Deborah L. Friedkin site. Archaeologists peeled back the familiar surface layers and found a story written in stone, a story that preceded the famous Clovis hunters by millennia. The site presented a textbook example of stratigraphy, the study of geological layers, resting clearly and undisturbed beneath a well-defined stratum containing classic Clovis spear points. Excavators uncovered an older, distinct occupation layer. This lower stratum was not a sparse scattering, but a dense concentration, a vast assemblage of thousands upon thousands of stone tools. The sheer volume was impossible to ignore, a testament not to a fleeting visit, but to a sustained, repeated human presence. To determine the age of this prolific workshop, scientists applied optically stimulated luminescence dating to the sediments that had encased the tools for millennia. The light trapped within those sand grains told a clear story. The last time sunlight touched that ground was approximately 15,500 years ago. This date alone places people at the site long before the Clovis culture emerged. But the tools themselves told an even more compelling tale. They were not crude precursors to the fluted points found above. They represented a completely different technological philosophy. The Friedkin toolkit included small, delicate bladelets and a variety of flake tools, all manufactured using techniques distinct from the iconic Clovis style. This was not a community learning how to become Clovis. This was a community with its own established traditions, its own way of solving problems with stone. The significance of the Friedkin site lies in its overwhelming physicality. It is difficult to argue that thousands of deliberately crafted artifacts, sealed in a datable layer below Clovis, are merely the product of natural rockfalls or geological accidents. This is not a whisper from the past, it is a sustained conversation. It provides some of the strongest physical evidence yet for a vibrant, pre-Clovis human presence in North America, a presence that was not just surviving but thriving with its own rich culture of toolmaking long before a single fluted point was ever crafted. It forces us to see the Clovis phenomenon not as a beginning but as a brilliant, later chapter in a story already thousands of years in the telling. The tools unearthed at Cooper's Ferry in Idaho are more than just artifacts, they are a map. Recent excavations along the banks of the Salmon River have peeled back the earth to reveal a campsite of astonishing age, where stone tools and the bones of ancient horses and bison were found sealed in layers dated by radiocarbon to between 15,000 and 16,000 years ago. This date alone places people here long before the ice-free corridor through the continental interior was open, a geographical impossibility for a land-based migration. But the real revelation lies in the shape of the stones themselves. The distinctive projectile points and blades recovered from these ancient strata do not look like the classic tools of early North America. Instead, they bear an uncanny, specific resemblance to artifacts crafted in northeastern Asia, particularly on the Japanese island of Hokkaido, during roughly the same distant period. This is not a vague similarity, it is a technological fingerprint, a shared language of stone that spans the vast Pacific. The implication is as clear as it is revolutionary. The people who camped at Cooper's Ferry likely did not walk from Siberia through the heart of the continent. They came by a different road, a wet highway now submerged beneath the waves. This evidence points powerfully to a coastal migration route, a journey made by boat along the North Pacific Rim. Imagine small groups, skilled mariners adapted to a maritime life, skirting the shorelines of Beringia and then down the coast of the Americas, exploiting rich marine resources as they traveled. They would have moved from island to island, from bay to bay, in a gradual expansion that bypassed the impassable ice sheets altogether. Cooper's Ferry, hundreds of miles inland along a river, would then represent a point where some of these coastal explorers later ventured upriver into the continent's heart. This single stratum complicates the migration map beyond recognition. It suggests that the peopling of the Americas was not a single-file march through an icy corridor, but a multi-pronged, strategic movement using different routes and different technologies at different times. Some may have come by land when the ice finally retreated, but others, as the tools in Idaho whisper, may have arrived much earlier, guided not by following game trails but by reading the currents and the coast. Sometimes the most powerful evidence is not a tool or a bone, but a footprint. In the stark, beautiful expanse of White Sands National Park in New Mexico, the Earth has preserved a moment of life with breathtaking clarity. Here, along the shores of what was once a vast Pleistocene lake, researchers discovered not one or two, but hundreds of ancient human footprints pressed into the soft mud of an ancient lakebed, now hardened into stone. These are not vague impressions, they are detailed records of weight, gait, and movement, left by adults and children as they walked across the damp ground over 20,000 years ago. To date these fleeting steps, scientists turned to a clever and definitive method. They collected ancient seeds of spiral ditchgrass, a water plant, that were embedded in the very layers of sediment above and below the footprints. Radiocarbon dating of these seeds provided a firm bracket in time, revealing that these people walked this shoreline between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. This date is a landmark in every sense. It places humans in the interior of North America not as a theoretical possibility, but as a documented fact during the height of the last glacial maximum, a time when ice sheets covered much of the continent. The footprints are a direct, tangible connection to individuals who lived in a world we can scarcely imagine. Some tracks show a person walking purposefully in a straight line for nearly a mile. Others reveal the playful patterns of children, jumping and skipping alongside the prints of a giant ground sloth, suggesting a shared landscape. One poignant set shows a mother setting down a child, adjusting her burden, and then continuing on her way, a snapshot of daily life frozen in mud. This evidence is arguably the most decisive single blow to the old timeline. It is impossible to argue that a footprint is a geofact or a product of natural processes. It is the signature of a living, breathing person at a specific moment in deep time. The White Sands footprints do not require interpretation of stone tools or debates over butchery marks. They are the proof itself, written in the earth. They tell us that long before the rise of the Clovis culture, families were already here, moving across this ancient landscape, their stories preserved not in artifacts they made, but in the simple, profound act of walking across a muddy shore under an ice-age sky. But the story of our early ancestors is not only written in footprints and stone, it is also etched into the bones of the giants they shared the world with. Deep within the sandstone cliffs of central Brazil, the Santa Helena rock shelter holds a collection of clues that speak to a profound and ancient relationship. Here, researchers uncovered a layer containing simple stone tools lying in direct association with the remains of a giant ground sloth, a massive, armored creature that once roamed the Pleistocene landscape. Among these bones were the animal's distinctive osteoderms, bony plates embedded in its skin like a natural suit of armor. What makes these plates remarkable is that several of them show clear signs of human modification, smoothed edges and drilled holes that suggest they were collected, worked, and perhaps even worn or used as tools by the people who lived there. Radiocarbon dating of materials from this occupation level points to human activity at the shelter, stretching back approximately 23,000 years. This evidence paints a vivid and intimate portrait of adaptation. It suggests that early humans in South America were not just passive inhabitants of an ecosystem filled with megafauna, they were active participants within it. The modified osteoderms hint at a deep familiarity with these creatures, an understanding of their anatomy that went beyond mere hunting. Perhaps these plates were valued as raw material for ornaments or practical items, transforming a part of the animal into a resource for daily life. This interaction complicates the simple narrative of hunter and prey, pointing toward a more nuanced relationship where humans observed, utilized, and integrated elements of the magnificent fauna around them into their own cultural practices. Santa Elena adds a crucial tactile layer to the growing body of South American evidence. It shows that by 23,000 years ago, human groups were not only present across the continent, but were already developing unique, localized adaptations to its specific challenges and opportunities. They were learning the secrets of a new world, one giant sloth bone at a time. The story of humanity's first encounters with the giants of the Ice Age grows even more ancient along the muddy banks of a slow-moving creek in Uruguay. At a place known as Arroyo del Vizcaino, a storm exposed something startling, a massive collection of bones belonging primarily to Lestodon, a giant ground sloth the size of a modern elephant. But this was not a natural graveyard. The bones were scattered, and upon close examination, they told a violent and deliberate story. Many bore the fine, straight striations of stone tools slicing through tendons and flesh, while the thick limb bones exhibited the classic spiral fractures that occur when fresh bone is struck to access the rich marrow inside. The evidence pointed unequivocally to human activity, to systematic butchery of one of the largest mammals to walk the Pleistocene Earth. The true shock, however, came when scientists sought to date this dramatic scene. Using optically stimulated luminescence on the sediments that had buried the bones for millennia, they measured the last time those soil grains saw sunlight. The results pointed to an age of approximately 30,000 years. This number stands at the absolute frontier of the debate. It pushes potential human presence in South America back to a time when the last ice age was near its peak, when global sea levels were far lower and vast ice sheets locked away immense quantities of water. A date this early suggests a migration of staggering antiquity, a journey that must have begun deep in the glacial period, challenging every model of how and when people could have traversed such a world. Arroyo del Vizcaino represents the extreme chronological edge of this entire mystery. It is a site that asks us to hold two staggering ideas in mind at once: the tangible, physical proof of human ingenuity in processing a massive creature, and a proposed time frame that stretches the narrative of settlement to its outermost limits. The bones in that Uruguayan creek bed are a direct challenge, whispering of a timeline so long it redefines the very meaning of early in the human story of the Americas. This journey through deep time has taken us from the tropics of Brazil to the icy caves of the Yukon, but the story inevitably circles back to its starting point, the Great Crossroads itself. The Tanana Valley in central Alaska is not just another location on the map. It is the very heart of ancient Beringia, the vanished land that once connected two worlds. Here, at sites with names like Broken Mammoth and Swan Point, archaeologists have uncovered a chapter that is crucial for understanding the entire migration epic. While the dates from these settlements, around 14,000 years ago, may not seem as shockingly ancient as others we have explored, their true power lies in the intricate details they reveal. These were not temporary camps of people in frantic transit, but established, thriving communities. They built substantial hearths, processed a wide variety of game from birds to bison, and crafted tools from stone and bone with remarkable skill. Most telling of all is the specific technology they mastered, a sophisticated microblade industry. These people manufactured tiny, razor-sharp slivers of stone, often set into slots in bone or antler points to create deadly, efficient composite weapons. This toolkit is distinctly different from the iconic fluted spear point technology that would define the Clovis culture to the south. This single technological fact transforms our understanding of the peopling process. The Tanana Valley sites demonstrate that at the very end of the Pleistocene, as the ice sheets were retreating and corridors were opening, the gateway region to the Americas was not inhabited by a single, uniform culture with one way of doing things. Instead, it was a place of technological diversity. Here, in the shadow of the glaciers, one group was perfecting the microblade tradition, a technology with deep roots in northeastern Asia. Elsewhere, perhaps moving along different paths, other groups carried the knowledge that would blossom into the Clovis tradition, or the stemmed point traditions seen at places like Cactus Hill. This means the initial peopling was not a monolithic wave, but a mosaic of movements, different populations, perhaps arriving at slightly different times or from slightly different source regions in Asia, brought with them their own cultural baggage, their own ancestral ways of solving the problems of survival in a new and demanding land. The hearths and tools of the Tanana Valley whisper that the first Americans were not a single people, but many peoples whose diverse stories converge to write the opening chapters of human history on a continent. The journey across Beringia was not a sudden leap into the unknown, but a step taken from a homeland already mastered. To truly grasp the anomalies of the Americas, we must look to their source, to the windswept plains of the ancient Arctic. In the far northeast of Siberia, along the frozen banks of the Yonna River, lies a site that redefines the limits of human resilience. Here, well north of the Arctic Circle, archaeologists uncovered a campsite dated to approximately 30,000 years ago. This is not merely an old campsite. It is a profound statement of capability. The artifacts found at Yonna include sophisticated tools crafted from the horns of woolly rhinoceros and mammoth ivory, alongside stone blades and evidence of hunting the massive beasts of the mammoth steppe. This places humans not as struggling survivors, but as established and successful hunters, thriving in one of the most brutally cold environments on Earth at a time when much of the northern hemisphere was locked in ice. The significance of Yonna cannot be overstated. For decades, a major objection to earlier migration dates was the assumed impossibility of human survival in such extreme latitudes during the glacial peaks. How could people have crossed Beringia, it was argued, if they couldn't even live that far north? Yonna dismantles that objection completely. It proves that the technological innovation, the tailored clothing, the communal hunting strategies, and the profound cultural knowledge required to not just endure, but to flourish in the Arctic, were already in place a full 30,000 years ago. This discovery shifts the entire foundation of the debate. If humans possessed all the necessary adaptations to live in the heart of the Arctic so early, then the theoretical window for crossing the Bering Land Bridge, whenever it was exposed, swings wide open. It stretches from a narrow period at the end of the last ice age to a potential span of tens of thousands of years. The Yonna site complicates the timeline from its very origin point, suggesting that the biological and cultural capacity for the journey existed long before our traditional models say the journey began. It turns the migration from a timed event into a lingering possibility, a door that was not just briefly ajar, but one that may have stood open for millennia, waiting for someone to walk through. But the Siberian Arctic was not the only northern frontier where early humans left their mark. Far to the south, in the heart of central Siberia, lies a site whose age is so profound it challenges the very timeline of our genus. The Irhoud site is an open landscape, a high terrace overlooking the Lena River, where the wind has scoured away the soil to reveal something startling. Scattered across the ancient gravels are hundreds of crude quartzite cobbles, many showing clear signs of having been struck to create a sharp cutting edge. They are simple pebble tools, the most basic technology imaginable, a rock hit against another rock to produce a useful flake. What transforms these humble stones into one of archaeology's greatest controversies is not their form but their context. The terrace in which they were found is not a recent geological formation. Based on analyses of the soil development and the deep weathering of the stones themselves, geologists estimate this layer was formed between 260,000 and 370,000 years ago. This number is almost incomprehensible in human terms. If these quartzite cobbles were shaped by intelligent hands, it means some form of early human was present in the brutal interior of Siberia, 250,000 years before our own species, Homo sapiens, is believed to have even evolved. The implications ripple across the entire map of human migration. Who could have been there at that immense depth of time? The maker was almost certainly not us. The candidate could be a mysterious cousin like the Denisovans, known only from fragments of bone and genetic legacy, or perhaps even an earlier, hardier traveler like Homo erectus, a species we know had already spread across Asia. Irhoud stretches the potential for human antiquity in the high north to almost unimaginable depths. It suggests that the pulse of exploration, the drive to push into new and challenging environments, may be a much older trait in our family tree than we ever suspected. This site stands as a stark reminder that the story of human settlement is not solely a story of Homo sapiens. It is a layered epic written by many different authors across millions of years, and we are only just beginning to decipher the earliest, most faded chapters. The winds of the Ice Age did more than just carve valleys and shape mountains. They built archives from dust. Across the plains of Central Europe, vast blankets of a fine, yellowish sediment called loess were deposited over millennia, carried by fierce glacial winds from barren outwash plains. These deep, layered deposits are a geological calendar, each stratum marking a different phase of the Pleistocene, and within them, archaeologists have found the tools of our ancient cousins and ancestors, from Neanderthals to the first Homo sapiens to arrive on the continent. Yet some of these Loess-bound toolkits tell a story that doesn't fit the established chapters. In places like Hungary and the Czech Republic, specific assemblages of stone artifacts appear in layers of earth that suggest a human presence either startlingly early or revealing a pattern of interaction more tangled than our simple models of replacement. The traditional narrative for Europe often follows a linear path, with Neanderthals established for hundreds of thousands of years before being gradually displaced by incoming modern humans around 40,000 years ago. But the lowest strata whisper of a far more dynamic and precarious dance. The climate of the Ice Age was not a constant deep freeze, it was a roller coaster of dramatic swings. During harsh glacial maxima, much of northern Europe would have been a desolate, frozen steppe, pushing human populations south into refuges in places like the Iberian Peninsula or the Italian Peninsula. Then, during warmer interstadial periods, groups would expand back northward, recolonizing the landscape. The tools sealed in different lowest layers capture these pulses of expansion and retreat. What complicates the timeline is when the style of tools in a given layer, which archaeologists use as a proxy for identifying which species made them, appears in a sequence that suggests overlap, exchange, or a much earlier foray than expected. Could some strata show Neanderthals adopting technologies pioneered by modern humans, or vice versa, long before a full replacement? Could an isolated stratum of tools found deep within an ancient Loess deposit indicate a brief, failed migration of modern humans into Europe tens of thousands of years before the major wave, a pioneering group that arrived, struggled, and vanished without leaving a genetic trace in living populations today. These wind-blown sediments force us to see the peopling of a continent not as a triumphant, irreversible march, but as a series of tentative advances and heartbreaking retreats, a story written in dust and stone by the relentless pressure of a changing world. The lowest deposits remind us that settlement was a fragile experiment, repeated many times over, with most chapters ending not in victory but in silence, erased by the next shift in the wind. Even the continent we call our ancestral home holds its own chronological puzzles, whispering that the story of human ingenuity is far older than we dared to sketch. In the dry, scrub-covered landscape of South Africa's Northern Cape Province, the Kathu Pan site presents a stratum that redefines the pace of our own intellectual dawn. Here, within ancient sediments, archaeologists uncovered a compelling record, stone tools lying in direct association with the bones of massive animals, including elephants. The tools themselves are not the crude, opportunistic flakes of our most distant ancestors. They represent a more advanced, prepared core technology, where the stone was carefully shaped in advance to produce predictable, sharp flakes. This is evidence of forethought, a blueprint held in the mind before a single strike was made. To date this moment of cognitive leap, scientists employed a method that reads the history of the stone itself, cosmogenic nuclide burial dating. This technique measures the buildup of rare isotopes created when cosmic rays bombard quartz crystals at the Earth's surface, a process that stops once the stone is buried deep underground. The measurements from the sediment sealing the tools pointed to a profound age, approximately 500,000 years. This places the craftsmen not as modern humans, but as Homo heidelbergensis, a likely common ancestor to both Neanderthals and ourselves. The date itself is not the primary anomaly, it is the sophisticated behavior it captures. Finding stone tools alongside butchered elephant bones at this immense depth of time suggests a level of planning, communication, and cooperative effort that textbooks once reserved for much later chapters. Hunting such colossal, dangerous game requires more than simple scavenging. It implies coordinated group strategies, shared knowledge of animal behavior, and the social cohesion to execute a high-risk plan. Kathu Pan complicates the smooth, upward curve of human cognitive evolution. It shows that key hallmarks of advanced thought, the capacity for complex collaboration and strategic resource acquisition, were being forged in the minds of our ancient relatives hundreds of thousands of years earlier than many models predicted. This stratum tells us that the spark of what would make us human was not a sudden flare in the recent night, but a slow, deep burning fire, lit in a much older darkness. The story of our own species contains its own startling revisions, written in the dust of a Moroccan hillside. For generations, the origin of Homo sapiens was a story anchored firmly in East Africa, a tale that began around 200,000 years ago in places like the Omo Valley of Ethiopia. This was the cradle, the singular birthplace from which all modern humans eventually emerged. Then came the excavations at Jebel Irhoud, a site that did not merely tweak the timeline but tore up the map. Within carefully studied layers of sediment, researchers uncovered fossilized skull fragments, jawbones, and stone tools. The fossils themselves displayed a fascinating mosaic of features, a face that was recognizably modern, yet with a slightly more elongated braincase reminiscent of older ancestors. It was the dating of the site, however, that delivered the seismic shift. Using thermoluminescence dating on the heated flint tools and electron spin resonance on a tooth, scientists arrived at a consistent and staggering figure, approximately 300,000 years. This single number pushed the clock back on our species' origin by a full 100,000 years, a quarter of our entire known history as Homo sapiens. But Jebel Irhoud's impact was not just about adding more years, it was about rethinking the entire geography of our dawn. A site in North Africa, thousands of miles from the supposed East African cradle, now held the title of the oldest known Homo sapiens fossils. This forced a profound and beautiful reimagining. Our species likely did not emerge in one single, blessed garden, but across a network of interconnected populations scattered throughout the African continent. The idea of a pan-African origin replaced the simpler story of a single cradle. Different groups, adapting to diverse environments from the savannas to the coasts, were evolving the suite of traits we recognize as modern humanity, exchanging genes and ideas across vast distances. Jebel Irhoud stands as a monumental testament to the power of a single, well-dated stratum to rewrite the deepest chapter of our own story. It humbles us with the realization that the narrative of us, the very definition of when and where we began, is not a closed book, but a manuscript still being unearthed, one layer of earth at a time. The journey from Africa to Australia is a story written in open ocean. While continents could be reached by determined footfalls across ancient land bridges, arriving in Australia required a different kind of courage, a willingness to leave the sight of land behind and trust a vessel to an unknown horizon. For decades, the accepted timeline for this epic voyage pointed to a human presence on the continent around 47,000 years ago. This date alone represented a staggering feat of early maritime skill. Then, a rock shelter in Australia's tropical north whispered a much older secret. Madjedbebe, a vast overhang in Arnhem Land, holds a stratified record of human life that pushes this maritime milestone to a breathtaking new depth. Excavations here revealed not just simple stone flakes, but a rich cultural toolkit, including finely crafted hatchets with ground edges, heavy grinding stones for processing seeds or ochre, and abundant pieces of this vivid red pigment itself, a material often used in artistic and ceremonial practices. This was evidence of a complex, settled culture, not a group of desperate castaways. To date this profound occupation, scientists turned to optically stimulated luminescence, measuring the last time the sand grains surrounding these artifacts saw sunlight. The results were unequivocal and revolutionary, pointing to an initial human presence at the site approximately 65,000 years ago. This number is not a minor adjustment, it is a seismic shift. It places modern humans on the shores of Australia a full 18,000 years earlier than the previous consensus, at a time when Neanderthals still dominated Europe. The implications ripple across the entire globe. To reach the continent by 65,000 years ago, these pioneering groups must have undertaken their maritime crossing from the islands of Southeast Asia even earlier, during a period of lower sea levels when the distances between visible landmasses were shorter but still formidable. This journey required more than a simple raft pushed by chance currents. It implies a sophisticated understanding of seacraft, likely some form of purposeful watercraft capable of carrying a viable population, along with their tools and knowledge. It suggests an intentional exploration, a collective decision to venture into the blue unknown, driven by curiosity, resource pressure, or simply the enduring human urge to see what lies beyond the horizon. Madjedbebe does not just complicate the timeline for Australia, it fundamentally redefines our perception of early human capability. The stratum here tells us that by 65,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were not just intelligent primates adapting to landscapes. They were cognitive giants, capable of conceptualizing a future on an unseen shore, planning a complex logistical feat, and executing a voyage that forever changed the story of our species. This shelter in the north is a monument not just to arrival, but to the moment we truly began to master our world, guided by stars, currents, and an imagination vast enough to cross an ocean. The vast, silent expanse of Lake Mungo in Australia holds more than just ancient shorelines. Here, in the crescent-shaped Lunette dunes that fringe the dry lakebed, the wind uncovered a profound testament to the inner world of our distant ancestors. The discovery of two individuals known as Mungo Lady and Mungo Man offered a startlingly intimate glimpse into a past so deep it redefines the dawn of human culture. Mungo Lady was found as cremated remains, her bones deliberately burned, collected, and then buried. Mungo Man was laid to rest in a carefully dug grave, his body sprinkled with vibrant red ochre, a ceremonial pigment that stained the earth around him for millennia. These were not casual disposals but deliberate, thoughtful acts. Initial radiocarbon dating placed them at around 40,000 years old, already a remarkable age for such complex practices. But science peered deeper. Researchers applied thermoluminescence dating to the very sands that had sealed the burials, measuring the light energy trapped in the mineral grains since they were last exposed to the sun's heat or light. This technique suggested a far more ancient timeline, pushing the age of these resting places to possibly 62,000 years. This number carries a weight far beyond mere chronology. It means that at a time when humans were first mastering their journey across the globe, confronting new continents and strange megafauna, they were also wrestling with the great, universal questions of existence. The meticulous care shown at Lake Mungo, the use of ochre likely symbolizing life or spiritual significance, the formal structure of the burial, all speak of a shared belief system, a collective understanding of life, loss, and what may lie beyond. This stratum complicates our cultural timeline dramatically. It shows that the capacity for complex symbolic thought, for ritual, for what we might call spirituality, was not a late development that arose after we had secured our physical survival. It was there, deeply embedded from some of our earliest moments as a species spreading across the earth. The dunes of Lake Mungo whisper that to be human is to seek meaning, to honor our companions, and to leave a mark that says, someone was here and they mattered, an impulse as old as our journey itself. The story of human expansion has always been a story of us, Homo sapiens, the sole survivors of a long and branching family tree. But a single bone found deep in a cave on a remote island shatters that solitary narrative. On the Philippine island of Luzon, within the limestone chambers of Calico Cave, archaeologists uncovered something that did not fit any known blueprint, a single-foot bone from an individual who was clearly human, yet clearly not like us. This fragment, a delicate metatarsal, belonged to a small-bodied hominin, a creature given the new name Homo luzonensis. The bone itself was startling, but its context was revolutionary. It was sealed in a stratum dated by uranium-series methods to at least 67,000 years ago. This date alone forces a breathtaking recalibration of history. It means that a different kind of human, an archaic cousin whose lineage we are still tracing, had not only reached the mainland of Southeast Asia, but had accomplished a feat we once thought unique to our own species, a successful crossing of open ocean to colonize an isolated island. Luzon has never been connected to the Asian mainland by a land bridge, not even during the lowest sea levels of the ice ages. To get there required a conscious, deliberate voyage across a significant water barrier. This single stratum rewrites the entire first chapter of seafaring. It tells us that the drive to explore, the ingenuity to build watercraft, and the courage to set out for an invisible horizon were not inventions of modern humanity. These traits were present in other branches of our family, deep in our shared evolutionary past. The discovery of Homo luzonensis complicates the timeline in the most profound way possible. It reveals that the story of human dispersal across the planet is not a single, linear march of progress led by one species. It is a layered tapestry of multiple experiments in being human with different hominins, each with their own unique adaptations and capabilities, testing the boundaries of the possible world. Some, like the makers of the tools on Flores Island to the south, succeeded for millennia. Others, like the small-bodied people of Luzon, left only a few tantalizing bones as a testament to their forgotten journey. This foot bone is a ghostly footprint from a parallel history, a quiet reminder that we were not the only ones dreaming of what lay across the water. The walls of those Sulawesi caves are not silent stone, they are a canvas from the dawn of the modern mind. In the humid darkness of limestone caverns on this Indonesian island, explorers found something that instantly recalibrated the history of human creativity. Along the cave walls are dozens of hand stencils where someone long ago placed their hand against the rock and blew or sprayed a mouthful of pigment, leaving a haunting negative silhouette of their presence. Alongside these are vivid, dynamic paintings of animals, including the unique native pig known as the babirusa, captured in motion. The art itself is breathtaking, but the true shock came from the method used to date it. Researchers did not date the paint itself, which is often impossible, but instead dated the natural growths that had slowly formed over the art. In these caves, tiny, bulbous formations called coralloid speleothems, akin to miniature cave popcorn, had grown on top of the painted line. Using uranium-series dating, which measures the decay of uranium into thorium within these mineral deposits, scientists could determine the minimum age of the art underneath. The results were staggering. The speleothems sealing the paintings were over 40,000 years old, meaning the art itself was even older, with some motifs potentially reaching 44,000 years. This number is a landmark. It places these Indonesian paintings as contemporaneous with, and in some cases older than, the most celebrated cave art of Europe, like that in Chauvet Cave in France. For generations, the narrative held that the pinnacle of early human symbolic expression, this explosive flowering of art, was a uniquely European phenomenon, tied to the experiences of humans entering a cold, challenging world filled with Ice Age giants. Sulawesi shatters that regional story. It demonstrates that the capacity for such sophisticated expression, for translating the living world into symbolic form and leaving a deliberate mark of identity, was not the invention of one continent or one environment. This cognitive spark, this profound urge to represent and communicate, was carried within the human mind as it spread across the planet. It emerged wherever our species went, an intrinsic part of our cultural toolkit. The implications are beautiful and humbling. It suggests that the birth of art was not a single, localized event, but a global awakening. Whether in the deep caves of France or the humid grottos of Indonesia, separated by tens of thousands of kilometers, different groups of humans facing utterly different worlds felt the same compelling need to say, "We are here, and this is what we see." This stratum does not just push back a date, it expands the very geography of the human spirit, showing that the story of our creativity is as wide as the world we explored. The act of shaping clay into a vessel is a quiet revolution. In the cool, dim interior of Xianrendong Cave in China's Jiangxi province, archaeologists sifted through layers of ancient sediment to find fragments of that very revolution, broken pieces of simple, coarse pottery. These were not the ornate urns of a later dynasty, but the humble, functional beginnings of a technology that would change human life forever. What made these shards extraordinary was not their beauty, but their profound age. Radiocarbon dating of the charcoal and bone found alongside them placed these pots at approximately 20,000 years old. This date sends a tremor through the traditional narrative of human progress. For generations, the invention of pottery was seen as a direct consequence of the Neolithic Revolution, the shift from hunting and gathering to farming that began around 10,000 years ago. The logic seemed impeccable. Once people settled down to cultivate crops, they needed durable containers to store their surplus grain, to cook their new foods, and to hold water. Pottery was the perfect solution, a child of agriculture. Yet here, in this Chinese cave, was clear evidence that this timeline was backwards. These pots were crafted by hunter-gatherers, people living a mobile life during the peak of the last ice age, a full 10,000 years before farming took root in the region. This stratum complicates the story of innovation in a fundamental way. It shows that a key technology we associate with settled, agricultural life was actually pioneered by people who followed the herds and the seasons. Why would mobile hunters need heavy, breakable pots? The answer lies in adaptation and ingenuity. Researchers suggest these early vessels were likely used for processing wild resources, perhaps for steaming nuts and roots to make them more digestible, or for rendering bone grease, a precious, calorie-rich fat extracted from animal bones. Pottery would have allowed for new, efficient ways of preparing food, unlocking nutrients, and making the harsh Ice Age environment more survivable. The Xianrendong pottery shatters the idea that major technological leaps must follow a single, predetermined path. It reveals a different pattern, one of independent innovation driven by immediate need. A group of people facing the specific challenges of their time and place looked at the clay beneath their feet and saw a solution no one else had yet imagined. This cave in China tells us that the human genius for invention is not tied to a particular lifestyle, but is a constant, restless spark, capable of igniting profound change even in the deepest cold of an Ice Age world. The sands of time are not always buried deep. Sometimes the most ancient evidence is laid bare by the relentless sea. On a storm-battered beach in Happisburgh, England, coastal erosion sliced through layers of history to reveal a fleeting moment perfectly preserved. Etched into the hardened silt of an ancient estuary were a series of hollows, unmistakably the footprints of early humans. They were not impressions in soft mud, but casts, the hollows left after the original mud had hardened and the softer material inside had washed away, creating a perfect negative of that distant day. The sheer age of these prints, determined by dating the surrounding sediments and the geological context of the long-vanished river system, is almost beyond comprehension. They are approximately 800,000 to 1 million years old. This single fact reconfigures the entire map of early human expansion. These are the oldest known hominin footprints ever discovered outside of the African continent. The individuals who left these tracks are believed to have been a species known as Homo antecessor or pioneer man, known from fragmentary fossils in Spain. To envision their world is to step into a different England, a land connected by land to continental Europe, with a climate cooler than today's, but still temperate, with coniferous forests and meadows grazed by mammoths, rhinos, and giant deer. The footprints themselves tell a quiet story of daily life. They show a small group, perhaps a family, moving across the mudflats of a wide estuary, likely foraging for shellfish, plants, or tracking game. Some prints are from adults, others from children, their smaller impressions preserved alongside the larger ones. They walked at a leisurely pace, not running from danger, but simply going about their lives in a landscape they called home. The profound significance of Happisburgh lies in the brutal challenge of its environment. For decades, a major question in human evolution was when our ancestors developed the biological and cultural adaptations necessary to survive outside the warm cradle of the Mediterranean and Africa. The established timeline suggested that hominins did not colonize the cooler, seasonal environments of northern Europe until around 500,000 years ago, with the arrival of the robust Homo heidelbergensis. The Happisburgh footprints smash that timeline to pieces. They prove that a much earlier, more gracile species was not only present in northern Europe nearly twice as long ago, but was evidently thriving there. This demands a radical reassessment of their capabilities. It suggests that Homo antecessor, over 900,000 years ago, had already mastered the use of fire for warmth, crafted effective clothing from animal hides, and built simple shelters to withstand the chill. They possessed a level of planning, social cooperation, and technological ingenuity that allowed them to turn a challenging, cool, temperate world into a viable homeland. This single exposed stratum on an English beach does more than just add years to a timeline. It fundamentally reshapes our understanding of the human spirit's resilience. It shows that the drive to explore, to push into new and demanding environments, is not a trait that emerged late in our story. It is an ancient, enduring hallmark of our entire lineage. Long before our own species ever walked the earth, other kinds of humans were pioneers, standing on the shores of ancient rivers, their footprints destined to become a message in stone, a testament to a journey that began not thousands, but nearly 1,000,000 years ago. Footprints are a ghostly signature, a moment of contact that outlasts the one who made it. On the sun-bleached coast of the Greek island of Crete, along a rocky outcrop known as Trachylos, the tides of deep time have revealed a set of such signatures that may rewrite the first page of our entire story. Preserved in what was once the soft sand of a Miocene shoreline are a series of fossilized footprints. They are small, with a rounded heel, a distinct arch, and a forward-pointing big toe in line with the others, a configuration strikingly different from the splayed toes of an ape and hauntingly familiar to our own. The dating of this stratum did not rely on radiocarbon, which cannot reach such depths, but on the microscopic fossils of single-celled sea creatures called foraminifera found within the same rock layer, and the position of the sediments within the island's known geological sequence. This analysis points to an almost unimaginable age, approximately 5.7 million years. This number is not just old, it is transformative. It places these possible footsteps in the late Miocene epoch, a time when, according to the dominant narrative of human evolution, our hominin ancestors were confined to the African continent, walking on 4 limbs in shrinking forests, only just beginning their tentative, upright journey. The Trachylos prints, if they are indeed hominin, shatter that geographical cage. They suggest that a bipedal, human-like primate was not only walking fully upright millions of years earlier than thought, but was doing so on a Mediterranean island, thousands of miles from the supposed cradle of humankind. The implications are so vast they bend the entire framework of paleoanthropology. It proposes a radical alternative that the story of our lineage is not a linear, African-only saga, but a messy pan-Eurasian experiment. Different populations of apes across the Old World may have been experimenting with upright posture in response to similar environmental pressures, from the drying grasslands of Africa to the coastal landscapes of Europe. Our direct ancestors may be just one surviving branch of a much wider, earlier family tree that we have barely begun to map. Of course, the site is met with intense, understandable skepticism. Critics argue the prints could belong to an unknown species of Miocene ape, perhaps a relative of the ancient gorilla or an extinct primate that convergently evolved a somewhat human-like foot for its own reasons. The debate hinges on millimeters of morphology, the precise angle of the toes, the depth of the arch. Yet, regardless of the final taxonomic verdict, the Trachylos stratum stands as the ultimate chronological anomaly. It is a profound reminder that the ground beneath us, even on islands we think we know, holds memories of worlds we have forgotten. These faint impressions in Cretan stone challenge the most foundational story we tell about ourselves, not just when we became human, but where that miraculous transformation truly began. The true weight of these 35 strata is not measured in years, but in the profound questions they force us to ask about our own methods. Individually, each site can be debated, its evidence explained away as a dating error, a natural rock formation, or an artifact that slipped from a younger layer. But collectively, they form a chorus of contradiction too loud to dismiss as mere background noise. This presents a deeper, more philosophical challenge than any single artifact ever could, a meta problem of context. How does a scientific discipline process a pattern of evidence that systematically undermines its most foundational story? The complication of the human timeline is not merely a problem of ancient stones and bones. It is a crisis of interpretation, revealing the inherent limits and subtle biases in how we reconstruct the past. Every dating technique, no matter how advanced, carries a margin of error and a set of assumptions. Radiocarbon dating relies on a stable ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere over time, an assumption that can be shaken by past cosmic events or localized environmental factors. Methods like optically stimulated luminescence depend on the resetting of mineral clocks by sunlight, a process that can be incomplete or complex in certain burial conditions. These are not flaws but inherent uncertainties in the tools we use to measure deep time. When an artifact appears hundreds of thousands of years out of place, the immediate instinct is to question the clock, not the event. Yet, when multiple clocks applied to different materials at different sites all seem to point in the same impossible direction, we must at least consider that our understanding of the event itself is incomplete. Perhaps the most humbling challenge lies in the very first step of recognition, telling a human-made tool from a trick of geology. For the sophisticated spear points of the Clovis era, the signature is clear. But for the earliest pioneers using the most basic technology, the line blurs. A rock fractured by a deliberate hammer strike looks remarkably similar to one shattered by thermal stress, frost action, or tumbling in a fast-moving stream. This is the geofact problem, and it sits at the heart of sites like Calico and Pedra Fiorada. It forces archaeologists to become forensic scientists of stone, searching for the faintest whisper of human intention in a world shaped by immense, indifferent forces. Our ability to see that signal is colored by what we expect to find. If the paradigm says humans arrived 15,000 years ago, then a stone flake from a layer dated to 50,000 years is far more likely to be labeled a geofact. If the paradigm shifts, we may look at the very same object with new eyes, suddenly recognizing a pattern we were previously blind to. This reveals the most powerful, invisible stratum of all, the layer of prevailing theory. Scientific paradigms are not just collections of facts. They are frameworks for thinking, powerful lenses that shape what we look for and how we interpret what we see. For decades, the Clovis first model was such a powerful lens. It provided a clean, elegant story, and it actively filtered the evidence. Anomalous dates were assumed to be contaminated. Pre-Clovis tools were reclassified as natural, and sites that challenged the timeline struggled for funding and publication. This isn't a conspiracy, it is simply how normal science operates. It seeks to fit new data into the existing picture. But when the anomalous data becomes a mountain, the picture itself must be redrawn. The collective weight of these 35 strata has done exactly that, applying enough pressure to crack the old lens and force us to look at the past with a wider, more accommodating focus. The complication, then, is not just in the soil but in the human mind. It is a story of our struggle to overcome our own assumptions, to listen to the quiet, persistent voices from the earth, even when they tell a tale we are not yet ready to hear. This slow accumulation of evidence is not just adding pages to the story, it is rewriting the entire book. The sheer weight of these 35 anomalous strata, from the footprints in white sands to the tools beneath the Clovis layer at Gault, has created a profound and irreversible pressure on the old narrative. We are witnessing a paradigm shift in real time, a fundamental change in how archaeology understands the human journey across the planet. The clean, linear model of a single migration across the Bering Land Bridge around 13,000 years ago is no longer a tenable framework. It cannot hold the vast, contradictory data that now spills from the Earth. In its place, a far more intricate and fascinating picture is emerging, one best described not as a timeline but as a braided stream. Imagine a great river fed not by one source but by many separate tributaries, each contributing its own unique flow. Some of these tributaries are ancient and nearly dry, their paths almost forgotten. Others are powerful and well documented. The story of human settlement is becoming this river, a complex interweaving of multiple migrations, multiple technologies, and multiple timelines. This new model embraces the possibility of many waves of people arriving in the Americas, not just one. It seriously considers the coastal migration route, with skilled mariners moving along the Pacific Rim by boat, perhaps tens of thousands of years before an inland corridor opened. It must now account for staggeringly early dates like those proposed for Cerruti or Arroyo del Vizcaino, not by dismissing them, but by asking what they might mean for a deeper, more forgotten human presence. And perhaps most astonishingly, it opens the door to the idea that some of the earliest footsteps on these continents may not have belonged to Homo sapiens at all, but to other, now extinct members of our extended family, like the mysterious Denisovans or even earlier hominins, whose fleeting traces we are only beginning to recognize. This shift is not a collapse of science but its greatest triumph. Science, at its core, is not a collection of unchanging facts, but a process of relentless questioning. It is a self-correcting mechanism. When the evidence no longer fits the theory must change. That is what is happening now. The paradigm is adapting, stretching, and growing more complex to accommodate a reality far richer and more surprising than we had ever sketched in our textbooks. The braided stream model acknowledges messiness, false starts, and lost chapters. It accepts that the human story is not a straight line of progress, but a tangled web of exploration, adaptation, and sometimes disappearance. This is the true legacy of these anomalous strata. They have gifted us not with answers, but with better, more humbling questions. They have returned a sense of wonder and scale to our own origin story, revealing a past that is deeper, wider, and filled with more forgotten journeys than we dared to believe. But the final, and perhaps most important, stratum in this entire mystery is not buried in the earth at all. It exists in the quiet hum of a laboratory, in the glow of a computer screen, and in the precise calculations of a new generation of scientific tools. The very technologies that first revealed these chronological complications are now becoming our most powerful allies in resolving them. For decades, the debate often hinged on interpretation, on the trained eye of an archaeologist looking at a fractured stone and seeing either a tool or a geofact. Today, we are moving beyond the limitations of human perception into a world of microscopic and molecular evidence. Advanced dating methods like optically stimulated luminescence and cosmogenic nuclide dating allow us to ask direct questions of the sediments and the stones themselves, bypassing the need for organic material and providing ages for events that were once beyond our reach. Ancient DNA analysis, once a fantasy, now lets us pull genetic whispers from a fragment of bone or even from the soil, identifying the presence of humans or animals in a layer without finding a single traditional artifact. High-resolution geological scanning can map a site in 3 dimensions, revealing subtle stratigraphic relationships and disturbances invisible to the naked eye, helping to confirm whether an artifact truly belongs to the ancient layer it was found in or if it slipped down from above. These are not just better tools, they are new senses. They allow us to see the past in wavelengths of information we never had access to before. They act as impartial referees in long-standing debates, capable of verifying a staggering claim or, just as importantly, quietly refuting one. A stone tool in a contested layer can now be tested for microscopic residues of plants or animals it once processed. Sediment from a cave floor can be sifted for the genetic dust of its ancient inhabitants. This technological shift is transforming the field from a discipline of persuasive argument into one of verifiable data. It reduces our reliance on inference and opens a path toward a more empirically grounded, if infinitely more complex, human story. The role of technology, therefore, is beautifully dual. It was the refinement of radiocarbon dating that first solidified the Clovis timeline, creating a clear paradigm. Then, as dating methods grew more diverse and precise, they began to dismantle that same paradigm, revealing older, deeper chapters. Now, these tools offer a way forward, a promise of clarity. They provide hope that future anomalies will not languish in controversy for decades, but can be swiftly and rigorously tested. The goal is no longer to force every new discovery into a simple, elegant timeline. The new aim is to build a robust, multi-layered chronological framework that has the flexibility and the strength to hold all the evidence, no matter how complicated or surprising it may be. The ultimate resolution to this 35-part mystery may not be a simple answer, but a better set of questions, asked with instruments that finally allow the Earth to tell its full, magnificent, and untidy story. The story that finally emerges from these 35 layers is not one of simple dates and straight lines, but a portrait of a family defined by an insatiable urge to see what lies beyond the horizon. It paints our ancestors and the many cousins who walked alongside them as the ultimate explorers, a resilient and deeply curious lineage that repeatedly tested the boundaries of the possible world. They did not wait for perfect conditions or guaranteed success. They ventured into the frozen Arctic, adapted to the dense rainforests of the Amazon, and launched themselves across open ocean to remote islands, not once but likely many times across hundreds of thousands of years. This narrative reveals a past filled with what we might call experiments in survival. Some of these experiments were dazzling successes, leading to the thriving cultures we are still uncovering. Others were heartbreaking false starts, entire branches of the human family that flourished for millennia on some distant shore, only to fade away, leaving behind little more than a few stone tools or a single, lonely bone as a testament to their forgotten journey. These lost lineages are not failures, but vital chapters in a much larger story of adaptation. They remind us that the path to our present was not predetermined, but was carved by countless choices, chances, and acts of courage in the face of an unpredictable world. To make sense of this, we must let go of the idea of a single, authoritative timeline. The new narrative is not a line at all, but a tapestry. Imagine a vast, intricate weaving where each colored thread represents a different group, a different technology, or a different migration pulse. Some threads are long and strong, running from the deep past directly into the present. Others are shorter, brilliant flashes of color that appear, weave into the pattern for a time, and then simply end. These threads cross over one another, they influence each other's direction, and sometimes they merge. The Clovis culture is one such brilliant thread, but we now see it was not the first, and it was not alone. It was woven into a fabric that already contained the older, subtler patterns of the pre-Clovis pioneers, the coastal voyagers, and perhaps even the ghostly imprints of earlier hominins. This tapestry is messy, complex, and infinitely more beautiful than a simple arrow through time. It reflects the true, chaotic, and creative nature of the human journey across the globe, a story not of destiny, but of endless possibility. So we stand at the edge of a great and beautiful mystery. The journey through these 35 layers of Earth does not deliver a neat conclusion or a rewritten textbook. Instead, it leaves us with something far more valuable, a profound and humbling sense of wonder. The story of human settlement, once a clear line on a map, has dissolved into a constellation of questions, each shining with the possibility of a forgotten world. This is not a sign that science has failed, but the clearest proof that it is working exactly as it should. A living discipline does not cling to comfortable stories, it listens, even when the Earth whispers tales that upend everything. These anomalous strata are not errors in the record, they are invitations. They ask us to be comfortable with not knowing, to embrace the complexity of a past that refuses to be simple. The ground beneath your feet in a park, a city street, or a distant canyon is so much more than dirt and rock. It is a vast, silent archive, and we have only just learned how to turn the first few pages of its deepest, most puzzling chapters. The complications to the timeline are not cracks in the foundation of history. They are the light coming through, showing us where to look next. They remind us that every answer we uncover simply leads to better, more fascinating questions. So I encourage you to carry this perspective forward. Look at the landscape around you, at the hills and riverbanks and coastlines, and see them not as static scenery, but as pages in an unfinished epic. Question the stories we take for granted, for history is not a monument, but a conversation, one that is constantly being revised with every new discovery. I would love to hear which of these mysteries resonated most with you, or what theories they spark in your own mind, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to join this ongoing exploration to help uncover more secrets whispering from the soil, please subscribe for more journeys into the heart of historical mysteries. Our collective story, the magnificent braided saga of how we came to be here, is far from finished. In fact, the most compelling chapters may still be buried, waiting for the next curious mind to listen. The real excavation begins after the video ends. This journey through 35 layers of mystery is merely a starting point, a map to a much larger landscape of questions waiting for your own curiosity. To continue exploring, I recommend a few paths. Many natural history museums now feature dynamic exhibits on human origins, where you can stand face to face with casts of ancient skulls, touch replicas of the very stone tools we have discussed, and see the stratigraphy of a dig site explained in vivid detail. These spaces make the abstract tangible. For a deeper dive, seek out the works of the archaeologists working at the forefront of this research, authors like Tom Dillihay, who led the work at Monte Verde, or the teams publishing new analyses from White Sands and Cooper's Ferry. Their books and papers are first-hand accounts of discovery, filled with the careful arguments and startling evidence that are reshaping our story. You can even participate directly through citizen science platforms, where researchers ask for help from the public to analyze satellite imagery, scanning landscapes for subtle geometric patterns or soil discolorations that might signal a forgotten settlement hidden beneath fields or forests. Your own observation could be the first step toward the next great find. Your perspective is vital. In the comments below, let me know which of these anomalous strata you find most compelling and why. Was it the intimacy of the White Sands footprints, the staggering age of the Surati mastodon, or the maritime mystery of Cooper's Ferry? This conversation is how we piece the puzzle together from different angles and insights. If this exploration expanded your view of history, a like on the video helps others discover this perspective. Subscribing to this channel ensures you are part of our next journey into the unexplained, where we continue to challenge the conventional and seek the stories buried just out of sight. Our shared curiosity is the most powerful tool we have. It is the trowel that brushes away the dust, the light that illuminates the deepest stratum. So let's keep asking, keep wondering, and keep digging for the truth together.